I wanted to continue with some true stories, and this time I'm shifting towards hunting stories, because oftentimes these are the most rational people, much like game wardens and park rangers, and yet what they see or hear often leaves them stumped, and so I think that brings a lot of validity to their stories. So now, prepare yourself, because it's time for another Lithos horror. One of my first solo trips into the woods happened when I was a kid. I decided to spend the afternoon sitting in a tree stand, and before I know it, the sun went down. I knew about the trails, and I knew them well, so I wasn't worried about finding my way back. Just as I was gathering my gear and getting ready to climb down, I heard the most horrifying scream echo through the woods. To my young mind, it sounded like a woman being murdered, or some sort of monster lurking in the darkness. Panic set in immediately. I jumped from the stand, grabbed my gear, and sprinted all the way back to the cabin. Completely out of breath, I told my dad and my grandfather what I heard. They exchanged nervous glances before telling me it was an old legend in those woods of a witch that supposedly haunted there. That story terrified me. After that night, I refused to hunt there alone, and I've always begged my dad or grandfather to come with me. It wasn't until a few years later that after my grandfather had passed away that my dad finally admitted the truth. The scream I'd heard was almost certainly a fox. During mating season, foxes can make an unbelievably eerie, human-like screaming sound. He confessed that both he and my grandfather had recognized it immediately, but they decided to have a little fun with me. My grandfather especially loved that I started asking him to hunt with me every time afterwards, and he didn't want that to change. Looking back now, I can't even be mad at them. It gave me a lot of extra time together in the woods, and those are memories I'm gonna always treasure. I'm convinced the woods on my property are haunted. The land was once part of a large plantation in the early 1800s, and there were several unmarked graves believed to belong to enslaved people just a few yards from one of my tree stands. The original plantation owner had a reputation for being especially cruel, and Harriet Tubman is said to have helped rescue several people from the property. One of those escapes reportedly led to one of the largest bounties in Maryland at the time being placed on a fugitive. Over the years, I've experienced more than a few things that I can't explain. At night, I've seen strange lights, almost like will-o'-the-wisps, hovering behind me or floating off in the distance, sometimes 10 feet above the ground. They linger for a few seconds before vanishing. Every time I've shined my flashlight towards them, there's never been anyone there. The scariest experience I've ever experienced happened in broad daylight. I was out walking when I got an unmistakable feeling that I was being followed. Then I heard someone call my name from directly behind me, clear as day. I turned just in time to see a rock the size of a baseball fly past my head. The strange part is that I lived in Maryland's coastal plain, where there are virtually no rocks that size. I searched, but no one was around. Last deer season, I shot a buck and asked a neighbor to help me track it down after dark. He brought along a thermal scope. While we were searching, he spotted what looked like a human-sized figure roughly 100 yards away. The unsettling part was that it showed up colder than the surrounding environment instead of warmer, like a body should. We didn't stick around to investigate. That said, not every strange thing I've seen in those woods has been supernatural. One time I looked through my rifle scope and accidentally caught my neighbor taking a dump. That too was pretty horrifying. My family deer camp is still a tent camp in the northwest Michigan forest. We have a 16 by 16 Korean War era canvas tent for sleeping and a Boy Scout wall tent for cooking. Anyway, we used to camp in a small clearing on public property that's about 50 yards from the road. One night I was woken up around 3 or 4 a.m. by the sound of the scariest, loudest scream I've ever heard. It was one of those long, single screams, but it sounded like a woman was being murdered about 100 yards away. Nobody else in the tent heard it or was woken up by it. To this day, I still don't know what it was, but have to guess something like an owl or maybe a fox? I don't know. Another time, I was walking around the ground, and I think on opening morning of firearm deer season. I walk up a 2-track road, about a quarter mile onto my trail, which I had marked with a reflective pin. But I almost never walk in with a light on, as I see pretty well in the dark. As I was walking, I just felt like I had passed my trail, so I turned my headlamp on to find the reflected pin. After I found it, I was turning around, and as I shut it off, there were 6 to 8 pairs of glowing red eyes, about 1 to 2 feet off the ground, staring at me. I tried shining my light directly on them, but I was never able to see what they were, and they never moved or even blinked. I was a bit freaked out, so I just drew my sidearm and continued up the trail to my blind. Now, even 10 years later, every time I walk that 2-track trail, I look at that spot, but I've never seen those eyes again. I'm a 64-year-old man who has hunted my entire life. Most of my hunting has been in Texas, but I've also hunted bear, moose, and elk in Canada, and I've traveled across the United States for hunting, camping, fishing, and even hunted wolves in Russia. I love the outdoors, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert or anywhere close to a woodsman my grandfather was. He was the real deal. Back in the mid-90s, I was hunting near Victoria, Texas for deer and large feral hogs. I especially enjoyed hunting hogs on that area because they were incredibly healthy and massive, often weighing 300 to 450 pounds. I was fortunate enough to hunt that private property for about 6 seasons. After filling my deer tag, I could usually take 3 to 5 large hogs, which would keep both of my freezers stocked for a year. The property was beautiful, thick hardwood forest along a small river. I had heard plenty of coyotes and had hunted them before. I had also seen and hunted timber wolves near the Canadian border above Montana, so I knew what those animals looked like. One year, after I had already taken my deer and most of the hogs I wanted, I decided to spend my last day exploring a section of the property I normally avoided. The area was difficult to access because I couldn't get a truck anywhere near it. So I rarely received hunting pressure to be there. After hiking for a couple of hours, I stopped to rest on an old fallen log deep in the woods. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought I was looking at a pack of wolves, but there was something very wrong with what I was seeing. They were taller than any wolves I had ever seen, and they had a reddish color to them. I'd never seen anything like it before, and I have never seen anything like it since. What shocked me most was their size. Even from 75 to 100 yards away, they looked enormous. The way they moved was unlike anything I could even describe. They seemed to glide across the ground, almost as if they were floating. They moved quickly and silently, like ghosts, and appeared to be following the trail of something. I watched them for what felt like an eternity, although it was probably only 5 minutes or less. During that time, I found myself thinking about the fact that I had 4 rounds in my rifle and 6 rounds in the single-action pistol I carried for emergencies. The way those animals moved made me question whether I could even hit one of them if I needed to. And understand, I'm not someone who scares easily. I've shot running deer at 125 yards and dropped them cleanly. I've had close encounters with brown bears and even have been charged by a 1,400-pound moose. I know what fear feels like, but nothing I've experienced compares to seeing those animals. I know how I would react if someone told me this story. I'd probably be skeptical too, but I swear those animals looked like something that shouldn't exist. They moved in a way that defied everything I knew about wildlife. And no, I was not drinking. I don't drink at all while hunting, not even a beer. Afterwards, I spoke with local ranchers and game wardens. They told me there were reddish-colored coyotes in the area, but nothing anywhere near the size of what I described. Later, while telling my hunting partner the story at a local cafe, an older Native American man overheard us. He told us when he was young, he would hear stories about large lead wolves in the area, although he had never seen one. I still don't know what I saw that day. Maybe there was an explanation I haven't considered. But after a lifetime spent in the wilderness, those animals remain the strangest thing I have ever encountered. Whatever they were, they scared the hell out of me, and they still do to this day. I was hunting deer with a friend. Had some tracks we followed, and we were careful not to make any extra sounds. We spotted some bear tracks earlier, but they had stopped in the middle of a small mud puddle, and we looked around in a good 50-meter radius, but to no avail. We did not find any new tracks of the bears. And we knew the tracks were fresh because it had left a rather damp pile of dung a bit further back, and all of the foliage was recently broken. Anyway, fast forward about a kilometer, and we came up to a small hill, very sparsely populated with trees compared to the relatively dense forest beneath the hill, since the hill was essentially a big pile of round Ice Age rock with moss on it. We climbed over a fallen tree and proceeded forth about 30 meters. Our goal was a clearance on the other side with some grass where we guessed the deer would be. Suddenly, the tree we had carefully stepped over snapped and crunched very loudly. Both of us were startled and turned around instantly with raised guns because we were sure there was a bear. It sounded like several hundreds of kilograms pressed down on a tree trunk in an instant. Like when you cut down a tree and it snaps, but louder. But there was no bear there. There was no wind or rabbit or deer or even a person. Just a tree that suddenly decided to make a hell of a lot of noise, and the curious part, without snapping. We scouted again the surrounding area thoroughly, and not even a pair of prints of anything else than a deer track which we were following was found. We checked the tree, but no marks or cracks or splits. but we were pretty sure the bear was somewhere close because we could swear we smelled damp fur sometimes. This was after a rainy day, with overcast and a slight mist, so it was a moist day. Well, we nervously chuckled and looked at each other and continued to the deer spotting place. That's where we hoped to tag a whitetail or two. We found a nice little overlook downwind, settled beneath a rock, and looked through the scopes to see which one we could hit. Suddenly, all the deer stopped feeding, and they looked slightly at us, but then more towards our left, and jumped away in a hurry. We thought, okay, sure, the bear is where they looked at. Maybe we just understood wrong and where we previously heard the cracking sound come from. Carefully, we went down the hill to check the spot. Nothing. It was completely empty. We went back home, the same route, and wondered what the hell had happened. Never have we heard a tree make that sound before or after that without snapping. You know when you drive a tractor over an old tree on the ground and it snaps? That was the closest thing I can approximate the sound to. We literally jumped to the sudden sound. Maybe it was some moist in the tree, some moisture or something, but I don't know. Unrelated to hunting, but in the military, before we had a long week of training in the woods, the chiefs told us, whatever you do, do not shoot at the trees. We thought, okay, why would anyone do that anyway? Now, this particular training set is quite mentally draining because it revolves around the notion to be able to fight with practically no sleep, and we did not know that beforehand. So we got an hour of sleep every night, even if that. By night 4, people started to come up into the tents at night, spooked and visibly shaken, but did not speak about it. I got out of the tent for my rotation of the guard duty. It was a beautiful night with lots of snow on the ground and a big full moon, so there was plenty of natural light. I started to see something moving around the corner of my eye, but it was not on the ground. It was almost up in the sky, but closer. I tried to catch the movement, but it seemed to always elude me. I concluded it must be birds, and they were big shadows, like lying humanoid form, but bouncing around up in the trees. And I started hearing people from other battle positions in the tent shouting, seeing them weaving their arms, aiming with their guns up towards the trees. So it was not just me seeing things or a collective mind that was starting to deteriorate. Literally, shadow people were bouncing around in the moonlight up in the trees. It was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen, and suddenly the remarks of not shooting the trees made sense. Amazing what tricks the mind can make what it's tired and deprived visual sense. Also, many times I asked some approaching dude for the security phrase just to blink and see what he was gone in an instant. Fun times. I've got a story from around 2020, right around when COVID started happening. A buddy and I took full advantage of school being out due to the pandemic. Him being 16 and me 15. We didn't have much responsibility, and I had just got my license, so we felt unstoppable. He and I are avid hunters. Any chance we get, we go into the woods. We jump all over it. So not much of a surprise, when everything closed down, we went straight to the woods nearly every day. We did a lot of trapping and predator hunting for a local livestock farmer throughout the spring and summer. One day, while we were out looking for a new spot to set traps, we came across this big swamp. We both agreed it was worth a shot to put out a few snares, hoping to catch a coyote or a bobcat. We continued to predator hunt for weeks, pretty much making it our home. We took out a decent amount of coyotes off the trail and off the property, and it got to the point where the farmer was telling us he could noticeably tell. His livestock dog wasn't going crazy all night like he had before. He tried paying us a couple of times, but we always refused, just happy that we were allowed to be out on his property and pursue our passion for the outdoors. Winter was fast approaching, and my buddy and I were avid waterfowl hunters. We decided to take to the talk to the farmer about the swamp in the very back of his property to see if he would allow us to hunt it. Of course, him being a great guy, he was more than happy to let us hunt it, even gave us permission to hunt all of his property, besides just to do a predator control. Fast forward a little to around the beginning of December. The first cold was coming in, which meant we were due for a push of waterfowl to come down from the north. This being like Christmas morning, we were super excited and we knew exactly where we were going, straight back to the swamp. Now, a little context to where this property was and the layout. The property was 15 miles from any town and roughly 3 to 4 miles from anyone's house. In fact, to get to this property, you have to turn down a private road with a gate. Now, the swamp is far back from the property, maybe 1.5 miles from the farmer's home. It was a pretty far pack to get back there, but luckily we were able to borrow the farmer's ATV to get back there. I remember the day exactly. It was December 7th, opening day for waterfowl season, and we got to the farm roughly around 3 a.m., loaded our stuff in a kayak, and then tied the kayak to the back of the ATV to pull it down the swamp. After a 10 to 15 minute ride, we arrived in the swamp. We got everything out, loaded it in a kayak, and started to paddle back. Our plan was to find the most open spot to put out decoys and to tuck into the surrounding buckbush. We found the perfect spot around 700 yards from where we first started. By now it was 4:30 in the morning, and we still had another hour and a half before the sunrise and 2 hours before legal shooting time. So we decided, since we had some time, we would catch a little sleep. I remember being asleep and hearing a cackle kind of laugh, the kind of that you hear from a hyena make off of the Discovery Channel. It was so real sounding it woke me up and startled me. I sat up and looked around the still dark, and my buddy was still asleep. I got a terrible feeling of being watched. I don't spook easily, and never in the woods as much as I have been outdoors. I knew and had heard and seen almost everything that the forest had to offer. Or at least, that's what I thought. That's when I heard a cackling sound along with something audible moving through the water. It wasn't close, but maybe 150 yards away. I woke my buddy up and told him to listen. He woke up confused, but once I told him to be quiet and listen, he seemed to realize I wasn't messing with him. He heard it and started freaking out, which made me panic. But we stayed as silent as we possibly could, hoping whatever it was would just move away. But just as it got slowly closer and closer, by then it was 50 yards from me, and slowly we looked at each other and reached for our guns and our shotgun shells, preparing to shoot whatever this thing was. As I was loading my gun, trying to stay as quiet as possible, my hand slipped off of my charging handle as I was trying to load the shell in the chamber. This brought an absolute silence to the whole swamp. The cackling and sound of something waiting for the water stopped. That's when we both shouldered our shotguns and aimed it at the buck bush in front of us, not knowing what would come next. Roughly 5 minutes of silence went by when all of a sudden we heard this deep, throaty yell come from right in front of us, where we had last heard the thing before it had stopped. My buddy yelled out, "Who's there? We're hunting! Go away!" That's when it happened. The thing started slowly creeping through the bush, not making a sound besides the broken branches on the bush. I couldn't take it anymore. That's when I yelled, "Who's there? If you don't answer, I will shoot." I guess that made the thing angry, because it almost sounded like it was running at us. But that's impossible, because we're waist deep in water. That didn't matter. I touched off a round at the base of the bush, but it kept coming, and we both fired the rest of our 6 shells total when it stopped and went dead silence again. We waited and waited, but a sound never came, just silence. The sun came up, and we both decided we should go look at what the thing had been. I prayed it wasn't somebody messing with us. But when we got there, there was nothing. No broken branches, no blood, nothing. We booked it out of there. I don't think I've ever paddled so fast in my life. We got back, jumped on the ATV, and went straight to the farmer's house to tell him what we had encountered. That's when he told us that supposedly the swamp was an old camp set up along the Trail of Tears where hundreds of Native Americans died. He never said he'd had any encounters with anything, but he had never stepped foot in that swamp. We never went back, and still to this day, I don't know what it could have been. All I know is that I'll never hunt alone, and I'll always keep a gun by my side whenever I go into the outdoors. Around 2010, when my friend and I were about 16 years old, we were out spotlighting on his property. He was driving an ATV and holding the spotlight while I sat in the back with a shotgun ready to take shots at any small game we came across. Rabbits, skunks, raccoons, anything we could spot. We eventually made our way into a wooded section of the property and spotted a raccoon sitting in a tree. We took the shot and dropped it. We weren't keeping any of the animals we shot. We were mostly just having fun and making sure we had actually hit what we were aiming at. We'd usually drive out afterwards and confirm the animal was down. The problem was this part of the property was heavily wooded, so we couldn't drive the ATV directly to where the raccoon had fallen. We shut off the ATV and decided to walk a little ways to find it. Now, this wasn't my property, so I didn't know the layout of the land. I had no idea what was all around us or how far away anything might be. All I knew is that we were standing in the middle of the woods at 1 a.m, and it was pitch black. The second we turned the ATV off and stepped away, we both stopped. Wait, did you hear that? We went quiet and listened. Coming from somewhere in the darkness was what sounded like some kind of strange tribal music. I mean, exactly the kind of music you would expect to hear in a movie scene showing Native Americans gathered around a fire, with drums and beating in the background. There were no lights anywhere, no houses in sight. Just us in the woods and what sounded like a ritual happening somewhere out there. Immediately, our minds started racing. What is going on? We started imagining some sort of strange ceremony or people in the woods doing something we definitely didn't want to be involved in. Eventually, we managed to calm ourselves down enough to remember that we had a loaded gun and we weren't completely helpless. We turned off our spotlight and just stood there listening, trying to figure out what exactly we were hearing. For several minutes, we traded nervous glances and whispered, "What the heck is that?" Then suddenly, the music stopped. And right after it went quiet, we heard something completely unexpected. A commercial. It turns out it wasn't some mysterious ritual in the woods. It was just a neighbor, somewhere nearby, listening to music through Pandora, probably sitting on their back porch or another side of the woods. The sound had carried through the trees and made it seem like it was coming from the middle of nowhere. Looking back, it was pretty funny, but in that moment, standing there in the woods at 1 a.m. with creepy drum music playing in the distance, it was about as unsettling as it gets. I was born and raised in the heart of Appalachia, Crosby, Tennessee. My family's land bordered national forests for miles and miles behind us. It was a wonderful place to grow up in, and I spent my fair time in the woods or fishing the Pigeon River outside of plain sports. Needless to say, I saw and heard a lot of things in the middle of the woods and that were weird. The weirdest one that sticks with me for my time is a time when my cousin and I were planning a hike and hunt in a place called the Devil's Backbone behind the house. It was a solid 2.5-mile trek through almost vertical, and almost 2/3 of the trip was straight uphill. It's rough hike, as steep as a horse's face, but it can be rewarding with killer views and a potential to shoot a buck/deer that might have only crossed your path with a human a handful of times. We got started mid-morning and had planned to be out at the Backbone and set up camp in a couple hours before dark. The hike turned out to be a little rougher than we had planned, and it started getting dark on us as some cloud cover rolled in and it started to drizzle. We fought through the laurel thickets for about another hour and finally ended up at the edge of the giant bowl in the Backbone. We were in the heart of some remote territory. At this point, we were damp from the drizzle and pretty worn down, so we started to pitch a camp, and were with the last bit of light we had left. We failed an attempt at building a fire due to the wetness, so we called it a night and went to bed. I can honestly say that night I had one of the best sleeps I believe I've ever gotten. Got out of the tent about an hour before light, and we started making our way to the backside of the bowl to set up and ground hunt. Our setup was solid, as we were perched on the lip of a ledge overlooking a deep holler that was full of oaks and poplars. As a lot of you know who are from here or have been in this territory, we were in the heart of mature timber. 150-yard shots in some spots was not out of the question. You could see a long ways in those big woods. As we were both sitting there and waiting for daylight to come, we heard some walking in the leaves, a few sticks breaking not far in the distance, and assumed it was a bear. The sound would come every 5 to 10 minutes or so, and it sounded like it wasn't moving much, or just sort of feeding/walking in a circle. Naturally, we assumed it was a bear feeding on acorns. After a few minutes, it's starting to become gray light, and sounds of twigs cracking and walking stops, and we hear a voice, like a loud whisper. It was extremely strange. My automatic reaction was, damn, we got another guy in here that had the same idea as us. But there was no way in hell that someone would walk almost 6 to 7 miles and an overblown Type 4 service load to maybe see one deer, because other access areas behind the house and the trail that began at the head of the Mill Creek, which was a good ways away and vertical at the entire time. So anyway, it's finally getting light enough to see most of the woods, and sure enough, we see a man sitting on the ground. Non-hunting clothes, just stacking sticks and kind of playing in the dirt. At this point, both of us are getting pretty uneasy. But we have rifles, and the dude has no idea where in the world we are, so we just sit and watch him through our binoculars. He was probably 75 to 100 yards away on a ridge vein down below us, and really starting to crank it up in the weird department. He went from loud whispers to screaming at the top of his lungs, at one point crying and talking to himself, saying, "I should have never done it. I should have stayed, but I am faithful to my master." And all of the kind of stuff that made us both ready to get the hell out of Dodge. After a few more minutes of crazy acts, he laid down and back flat against the ridge and just looking up and talking to himself. And that's when we decided it was a good time to sneak out of there and get back to our camping spot. I had a feeling the dude would see us because of the crunchy leaves and whatnot, but we tried to be as sneaky as possible. We hadn't took 3 steps, and this man raises up, sees us, throws a hand in the air, and hollers at us. It wasn't a friendly, like, hey buddy type of holler, but more of a, my master is away, but you're not welcome. Or something to that effect. He let out a few more demonic bellers, and we just laid back and down and started looking up at us. We were both pretty terrified, I ain't gonna lie. And we damn near sprinted half a mile back to our camp spot, packed our tents and blew Dodge. Left my favorite flashlight in that spot. I imagine it's still there. A 5.5 hour hike took us to about an hour and a half going out. Once we got out, we called a few buddies who worked for the Forest Service in the national park and let them know what was going on and where. Now, if it never came of it for a couple of months until dead of January or February hit, and he came out and was wandering around Hartford. The story I was told that is he was a hitchhiker from somewhere up north who checked all the boxes for the moccasin bin and dropped off by a trucker in Hartford and was going to go live off the mountains. I reckon they found him dead in Harmon, North Carolina a year or two later. During the early bow season of 2006, I was hunting in the Cumberland Mountains in southern Scott County. I'd wounded a doe with my bow and was following the blood trail of something through an old strip mine area, carefully tracking her through an overgrown terrain. As I stepped out of the pine thicket into an abandoned strip pit that had become heavily grown over, I immediately noticed something strange. The woods have gone completely silent. Anyone who spends time hunting knows that the forest is never really truly quiet. There was always something, birds, insects, wind, that goes through the trees, or animals moving in the brush. But at that moment, everything had stopped. The silence felt so unnatural, and I immediately became uneasy. I slowly scanned the area, trying to figure out what had happened, when something unusual caught my eye. About 50 feet above the ground, above the scrub pines surrounding the pit, there was a section of the air that looked distorted. It was as if a part of the sky had become blurry, almost like looking at a television screen that was out of focus. The shape appeared oval, several feet and wide and several feet tall. The air around it seemed to ripple or waver over it, almost like it was fading in and out. Along with the strange visual effect, I noticed a faint odor in the air. It was difficult to describe, but it reminded me of an electronic smell or some sort of cement or chemical scent. I stood there watching as the strange distortion seemed to slowly change in intensity. It would become more noticeable and then weaken slightly. I looked away for a moment and then looked back, expecting it to be gone, but it wasn't. The distortion remained exactly where it had been. After roughly 30 to 45 seconds, it gradually faded away until the air looked completely normal again. The strange smell lingered briefly, but eventually that disappeared too. Even after the distortion was gone, the silence continued for several more minutes. Slowly, almost one sound at a time, the noises of the woods returned. Not long afterwards, I developed a severe headache that lasted for several hours. My joints became unusually stiff, and I didn't feel completely normal again until the following day. I continued searching for the deer, but I struggled to concentrate because of the headache and never recovered the animal. To this day, I don't know what it was I experienced. I've spent plenty of times outdoors, and I've seen my share of unusual things, but nothing has ever compared to that moment in the Cumberland Mountains. Whatever it was one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences in my life. I was on my way to go hunting and had just crossed Mackinac Bridge to reach Michigan's Upper Peninsula. A major storm had moved in and the rain had just started coming down in sheets. It was the kind of downpour that where you have your windshield wipers running at full speed, yet you still have to slow down and strain to see out for the water. While driving up a hill, my daughter and I both noticed something standing in the middle of the road ahead of us. Visibility was terrible, but we could clearly make out what looked to be a person standing there. We both immediately pointed it out and became concerned that somebody was going to get hit by a vehicle. Then it turned and bent down, and then suddenly it wasn't a person. It was a huge black dog. To this day, I can't explain what happened. It could have been the combination of heavy rain and poor visibility and looking from the bottom of a hill, but both me and my daughter saw what appeared to be a man standing in the road before realizing it was an animal. I pulled over to help, and another man in a truck stopped on the opposite side of the road. I'm a dog groomer, and I always keep my slip leads in my vehicle because I love animals and will stop to help a dog in need. Still, I was secretly hoping someone else would be able to handle this because my truck was packed full of hunting gear and the only available space would have been in the front seat with my daughter. The animal remained in the middle of the road, looking back and forth between me and the other man. When I got closer, I was surprised at how large it actually was. I also felt an uneasy sense of intimidation from it. It looked somewhat like a black German shepherd, but much larger, and with a much more wolf-like appearance. I've worked around countless large dogs over the years, and if I had to guess, I would say it's some kind of wolf hybrid. The man across the road shouted, asking if it was my dog. I yelled back that it wasn't mine. The animal continued standing there, watching both of us. In my head, I kept repeating, "Don't pick me, please don't pick me," over and over. But I didn't have room in my truck, and honestly, I wasn't comfortable putting such a massive, unfamiliar animal in my vehicle. Something about it just felt unsettling. Then the other man called out, "Here, boy," and patted his leg. The animal immediately ran over to him. Once I saw that it was being taken care of, I got back in my truck and continued towards my hunting destination. My daughter and I talked about it afterwards, and she said the exact same thing I had experienced, that it looked like a person standing in the road and turned and revealed itself to be a dog. Maybe there was a completely normal explanation. Maybe the storm and the darkness and the heavy rain created an optical illusion. But the fact that both of us saw what we saw at the same time still sticks with me. It may not have been paranormal, but it was definitely one of the strangest encounters I've ever had on the road.